Welcome back to the second session of Introduction to Poetry. We stopped last time to Villanelli and Setena. The Villanelli is a 19-line poem with five tercets, three-line stanzas, and a concluding quatrain, four lines, using only two rhymes throughout the entire poem. Here is what makes it distinctive. Lines one and three of the first tercet repeat alternately as refrains throughout the poem, then appear together in the final two lines. The circular repetition creates obsessive, haunting effects perfect for poems about obsession, memory, or loss. Dylan Thomas famous "Do not go gentle into that good night" is a villainal. Notice how the refrains "do not go gentle into that good night" and rage again is the dying of the light repeat throughout, creating an insistent urgent effect. The sustainer is even more complex. A 30-line form with six stanzas or of six lines each plus a three-line envoi or conclusion instead of rhyme. It uses elaborate repetition of six and words in a rotation pattern, the same six words in the lines throughout the poem, but in a changing order. This form creates a sense of sprawling obsession and is often used for meditative or psychological themes. Poems with or forms from world cultures. Poetry forms aren't limited to English or European traditions. Haku is a Japanese form of three lines with 575 syllable pattern, traditionally focusing on nature and capturing a moment of insight or perception. A classic haku might be an old silent pond, a frog jumping into the pond, splash, silence again. Modern haku in English often breaks the syllable role but maintains the form's contemplative spirit. Haku values concision, creates imagery, and seasonal references called keiju. The ghazal is a form from Persian and Urdu poetry, or the ghazal is a form from Persian and Urdu poetry consisting of rhyming couplets and a refrain. Each couplet is autonomous. It can stand alone, creating an equals effect where each couplet is a jewel on a string. Ghazals traditionally explore themes of love and loss with melancholic or melancholic beauty. The form has been adopted widely in English poetry by poets like Aga Shahid Ali, who wrote the only language of loss left in the world is Arabic. These words were said to me in a language not Arabic. Free verse and narrative poetry. Not only poetry follows traditional forms, free verse poetry breaks from conventional roles of meter and rhyme, giving poets maximum flexibility in structure and expression. This doesn't mean free verse lacks structure. Skilled free verse poets created their own forms responsive to their content, using line breaks, spacing, white space, and other techniques to shape meaning. Most contemporary poetry is written in free verse, allowing poets to let content dictate form rather than fitting content into predetermined patterns. Walt Whiteman pioneered the free verse in English with leaves of grass, creating long flowing lines that matched his expansive subject matter. Narrative poetry tells a story, whether brief or epic in scope. Ballads, traditional narrative songs tell stories of love, tragedy, or adventure. Epics like Homer's Odyssey or Virgil's um, Aeneid tells long, complex stories using poetic language and devices while maintaining plot, characters, and settings like fiction. Narrative poetry demonstrates that poetry and storytelling aren't opposed, they can work together powerfully. Now let's move to form and content about Denise um, Livratov wrote. Form is never more than a revelation of content. This profound statement means that a poem's form should emerge from and reveal its content. The form isn't arbitrary, rare, or purely decorative. It's integral to meaning. About chaos might use fragmented regular form, while a poem about order might use a regular structured form like a sonnet. As you encounter poems, consider why the poet choose a particular form or invented their own. How does the structure enhance meaning? What limitations does the form impose? And how does the poet work within or against those limited limits? Sometimes the poets use traditional form that connect with the literary tradition. Sometimes they invent new forms to express new experiences. Understanding form deepens your appreciation of poetic craft and provide you with options when creating your own poems. Historical and cultural context introduction. New poem exists in a vacuum. Every poem emerges from a specific historical moment and the cultural context that shapes its themes, styles, and concerns. Understanding context doesn't limit interpretation, it enriches it by revealing layers of meaning you might otherwise miss. Context helps you understand what was revolutionary about poem when it was written, what assumptions or traditions the poet was working with or against, and what conversations the poem joins. For example, when Wordsworth and Coleridge published lyrical ballads in 1798 using everyday language instead of elevated poetic diction. It was revolutionary, but you only understand how revolutionary if you know the context of um, 18th century poets. Studying poetry historically also shows how poetic concern and styles evolve across time, while certain fundamental human themes, love, death, loss, joy, remain constant. Now let's go to how context influences poetry. The time period when a poem is written influences everything from its subject matter to its vocabulary and syntax. A Victorian poem about love carries different assumptions about gender, marriage, and sexuality than a contemporary poem on the same theme. Victorian poems might assume women are pure and passive, men active and protective. Assumptions contemporary readers would challenge historical events, wars, revolutions, social movements, leave indelible marks on poetry. The poetry of World War First, for instance, shifted dramatically from patriotic celebration at the war's beginning to bitter irony at the war's horror became apparent. Wilfred Owens Deleuze at Decorum Est directly challenges earlier patriotic poetry, calling the idea that it's sweet and proper to die for one's country the old lie after describing a gas attacking uh, gruesome reality. Now let's move to cultural context. Cultural context include the poet's nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, and social position. Poetry from different culture reflects diverse aesthetic values, uh, philosophical traditions and the literary conventions, and Arabic ghazals, the Japanese haiku, and English sonnets, each emerge from distinct culture traditions with different ideas about what poetry should be and do. Arabic poetry values intricate rhyme and wordplay. Japanese poetry values compression and seasonal imagery. English poetry in Shakespeare's era valued elaborate metaphor and rhetorical complexity. Understanding these cultural contexts helps you appreciate poems on their own terms rather than imposing inappropriate expectations. Haiku isn't a failed sonnet. It's a different form from different tradition with different goals. Now let's go to why context matters. Let me give you specific examples of why context matters. Emily Dickinson's poems gain, yeah, poems gain tremendous power when you know she wrote them in isolation in 19th century New England, rarely leaving her home, challenging conventions about women's roles and the poetic form. Her dashes unconventional capitalization and slant rhymes were radical departures from expected poetry of her era, understanding her isolation and the constraints on women in her time makes her bold experimentation even more impressive. Langston Hough's Harlem Renaissance poetry speaks to specific struggles and celebrations of African American experience in 1920s through 1940s. The Great Migration from South to North, racism and discrimination, the flourishing of Black arts and culture in Harlem, while remaining relevant today when Hughes asks what happens to a dream deferred in Harlem. He's speaking both to his specific historical moment of segregation and ongoing civil rights struggles and to universal human experience of thwarted aspirations. Now let's go to literary movement romanticism. Understanding major literary movements provides crucial context. Romanticism, flourishing from roughly 1800 to 1850, emphasized emotion over reason, immigration over logic, nature over civilization, and individual experience over social convention. Romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, and the Byron rejected enlightenment to rationalism, celebrating spontaneous feeling and the sublime power of nature. They revolutionized poetic language by incorporating everyday speech rather than elevated poetic dictation or diction. Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads declared poetry should use the real language of men. Romantics valued childhood innocence, the power of imagination, individual genius, and emotional authenticity. Understanding Romanticism helps you recognize why a nature poem from 1820 isn't just describing scenery. It's making philosophical claims about humanity's relationship with nature and the superiority of natural emotion over artificial social conventions. Uh, Now let's move to modernism. Modernism emerging around 1900 and flourishing through 1950 represent radical break from tradition. Modernist poets like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, H.D. William, Carlos Williams, and Marianne Moore experienced with fragmentation, free verse, multiple perspectives, and illusion. Responding to World War is unprecedented horror and rapid modernization disorienting effects. They captured feelings of alienation, fragmentation, and cultural crisis while innovating new forms. Eliot's The Wasteland exemplifies modernist techniques. It fragments across different voices, times, and places, alludes to multiple literary and cultural traditions, uses free verse, and presents a vision of modern civilization as spiritually empty. Bounce imagism emphasizes the concrete imagery and the economy of language in a situation of the metro compares the faces in a subway to beetles on a wet black blue is just lines. Understanding modernism helps you appreciate why these poems seem deliberately difficult. They're enacting the fragmentation and difficulty of modern experience. Now let's go to post-colonial poetry. Post-colonial poetry from 1950 to the present emerges from formerly colonized nations whose poets write back to Western literary traditions, reclaiming languages and stories suppressed by colonialism. Drake, Walcott from Saint Lucia, Aga Shahid Ali from Kashmir, Warsan Shire from Somalia. These poets explore themes of displacement, identity, cultural hybridity, and resistance. They often write in colonizers' languages, English, French, Spanish, but transform those languages to express their own experiences and challenge colonial narratives. Walcott writes, I am poisoned with the blood of both. Where shall I turn? Divided into or divided to the vein, capturing the complexity of post-colonial identity. These poets navigate multiple cultures' identities, question whose stories get told, and challenge Western literary dominance while creating powerful hybrid forms that blend traditions. Now let's move to the importance of background for interpretation. Now, a critical point about using context, knowing context doesn't mean reducing poems to historical documents or treating them as mere reflections of their time. Great poems transcend their immediate contexts while remaining rooted in them. Context provides a starting points for uh, interpretation, not final answers. When you read Sylvia Plath's Daddy's knowing about her father's death, when she was 8 and amid 20th century gender politics enriches your reading without determining it, your personal response still matters. You might read the poem differently than someone else based on your own experience, and that's valid as long as both reading are supported by textual evidence. The best readings balance contextual knowledge with close attention to the poem's language and your own thoughtful response. Researching context. So, how do you research context effectively? When poem reference unfamiliar historical events, places, or cultural practices, look them up. If a poem mentions the Harlem resistance or Renaissance, research what that was, look up authors' biographies to understand their subjects, positions, and influences, where they were born, what they experienced, what they believed, consider what movements or traditions the poet belonged to or reacted against. Was this poet part of the Romantics, modernist working within or against specific traditions, but remember context of inform interpretation doesn't replace careful attention to the poem's language and your own thoughtful response. Context is a tool for understanding, not a replacement for close reading. The best readings balance contextual knowledge with close attention to the text itself and your own critical thinking. Now let's go to approaching a poem introduction. Many students feel intimidated approaching poetry, worried they miss the meaning or misinterpret the poet's intention. The anxiety is completely normal, but ultimately unnecessary. Reading poetry skillfully is less about finding single correct answers, as if poems were puzzles with one solution, and more about developing systematic strategies for engaging with complex language. This section offers practical approaches that will make you more confident, insightful poetry reader. These strategies build from initial encounter through deep analysis, giving you a reproducible process for understanding any poem. You can apply these same steps to a Shakespeare sonnet, a contemporary free verse poem, or a haiku. The approach remains consistent even as the poem vary wildly. Read aloud multiple times. Always begin by reading the poem aloud at least twice, slowly slowly paying attention to rhythm, pauses, and sound patterns. I cannot emphasize this enough. Poetry is meant to be heard, not just seen. Reading aloud helps you catch rhythms, sound devices, and emphasis you'd miss reading silently. Listen for where the poem speeds up or slows down, where it feels smooth or jagged, harsh or gentle. Notice where natural poses do they match link breaks or create tension by not matching. Let your first reading be about expressing the poem's music and the emotional arc before worrying about interpretations. Do not stop to analyze yet, just listen to how the poem sounds, how it feels in your mouth, how it affects your emotionally. Then read it again, starting to notice patterns and details. Now let's go to paraphrase for literal meaning. After your initial readings, paraphrase the poem in your own straightforward language. What is literally being said? Who is speaking to whom? What happened in the poem? This step grounds you in the poem's basic content before you explore deeper meanings. If a poem says two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Your paraphrase might be two paths split in a forest in autumn. Don't worry if paraphrase feels reductive. It's a tool, not the destination. You're not trying to capture everything the poem means, just establishing basic literal content. Some complex poems resist to paraphrase, which itself tells you something important if you cannot paraphrase it. That singles the poem's works through imagery, association, or fragmentation rather than straightforward narrative or description. Now let's go to annotate for devices and the structure. Now read again with pencil and hand, making literary devices, structural features, and patterns. This is where you become an active, engaged reader rather than passive consumer. Cycle repeated words for images. Repetition always signals importance. Underline striking phrases that seem particularly vivid, strange, or beautiful. Note rhyme schemes by making end words with letters A, B, A, B. Mark stanza patterns. Note significant line breaks, especially surprising ones. Identify and label metaphors, symbols, sound devices like alteration or essence. Look for contrasts, light versus dark, loud versus quiet, hope versus despair. Note surprises, moments where the poem shifts direction or tune. This active reading makes you notice craft elements you would other miss and gives you concrete evidence for interpretive claims later. Now let's go to ask guiding questions. Use systematic questions to deepen analysis. First, who is the speaker? Remember, the speaker isn't necessarily the poet's poems create personas. What is the tune? Serious, playful, angry, melancholic, ironic? What the setting and situation? Where and when does this poem take place? What's happening? What are the poem's the central images and symbols? What pictures does it create? What objects or images recur? What the theme, the larger idea, or inside the poem explores like mortality, love, identity, injustice. How do form and content relate? Does the form enhance the meaning? What surprises, tensions, or shifts? Where does the poem turn or change direction? What questions does the poem have unanswered? Good poems often pose questions rather than providing neat answers. Now let's go to from observation to interpretation. Now move from observation, what is in the poem, to interpretation, what it means. Strong interpretation is always supported by textual evidence. Do not just assert your interpretation without support. Do not say that this poem is about death without showing how specific words, images, or structural choices support that reading. Be willing to revise initial interpretation as you notice new details. You might think a poem is simply about nature, then realize the nature imagery symbolizes something else. The best readings acknowledge the poem's complexity and ambiguity rather than oversimplifying. It's better to say this poem seems to explore tensions between X and Y than to claim this poem definitely means they, Z, when the poem resists a simple summary. This slide quotes a good reader should be like a good detective, noticing details, making connections, asking questions, and following the evidence to well-supported conclusions. Additional tips, trust your fair. Here are additional strategies for strong reading. First, trust you pay attention to sounds and rhythms. How the poem sounds is part of what it means. If a line feels harsh and jagged, with hard consonants and broken rhythms. Consider why the poem and poet created that effect. If a section feels smooth and flowing, what purpose does that serve? Sound isn't decoration, it's meaning. When Tennyson writes, the murmuring of innumerable bees, the soft M and N sounds, and the rhythm actually sounds like buzzing from enacts content. Now let's go to patterns and ambiguity. Second, look for patterns. Notice what repeats: words, images, sounds, structures, repetition signals importance. If night or darkness appears 5 times in a short poem, that's clearly significant. Also notice disruption to patterns, which often mark significant moments. If a poem maintains a steady rhythm, then suddenly breaks it. That breaks likely emphasizes something important. Third, embrace ambiguity. Good poems often resist single interpretations. Multiple valid readings can coexist. T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of Junior Alfred Prufrock has been interpreted in countless valid ways. Acknowledge complexity rather than forcing clarity. It's intellectually honest to say this line could mean either X or Y, and perhaps that ambiguity is intentional rather than pretended. Certainly, you do not fear. Now, let's go to building analytical skills. These strategies transform poetry from mysterious code to engaging puzzle with patience. This systematic approaches becomes intuitive. You'll start noticing devices and patterns automatically without consciously thinking. I'm looking for metaphors now. You will ask good questions naturally. You'll build sophisticated interpretations confidently. Remember, becoming a skilled poetry reader takes time and practice. Be patient with yourself as you develop these skills. You wouldn't expect to play piano beautifully after one lesson. Similarly, reading poetry well requires sustained practice, but unlike piano, you already have the basic tool language. You're developing existing capacities rather than learning from scratch. Every poem you read carefully builds your skills. Now let's go for case study introduction. Now let's apply our analytical strategies to a famous poem, Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. This seemingly simple poem has been both beloved and widely misinterpreted. A perfect opportunity to demonstrate how careful reading reveals complexity. This poem is often read at graduations as an inspirational message about choosing the unconventional path, about individualism and non-conformity, but careful analysis reveals something more subtle and ironic. We will work through the poem systematically, modeling the analysis process you can use with any poem. This case study will show you how initial impressions can evolve and deepen through careful attention to the next or to the text. Here is a complete poem. Let me read it aloud. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could. to where it bent in the underworth, then took the other addressed as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for the passing there, had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages two roads diverged in the woods, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all difference. Now let's analyze this systematically. First step analysis. Initial reading suggests a poem about choosing between two paths in a forest, often interpreted as celebrated individualism and non-conformity. Taking the road less traveled by, but careful paraphrasing reveals complexity. Let's paraphrase. The speaker encounters two paths in an autumn forest. He wishes he could travel both, but must choose one. He examines one path as far as he can see. Then he takes the other path, which seems slightly less traveled, or does it? Actually, he admits both paths were worn about the same. Both were equally covered with leaves that morning. He tells himself he's come back for the other path someday, but doubts he actually will. He then imagines how he will tell his story or this story in the future, with a sigh claiming he took the less traveled road, and that choice made all the difference. Notice what this perhaps reveals. Speaker acknowledges the paths were actually very similar, but imagines he'll later claim he took the unique path. Form and structure. The poem consists of 4 5-line stanzas called quatrains, written in iambic tetrameter, 4 iambic feet per line. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. The rhyme scheme is A B A B in each stanza, creating a slightly unconventional pattern, not quite couplets, not quite alternating rhyme. The regular form creates a conversational narrative tone. This sounds like someone telling a story casually, but notice how the final stanza shifts to future tense. I shall be telling and uses a dramatic dash to create a pause. And I took the one less traveled by. That repeated I and the dash created emphasis and hesitation as if the speaker is constructing or rehearsing his future narrative. The form is regularity contrasts with the conceptual twist the poem performs. Key literary devices. The central metaphor compares life choices to roads or paths. A common metaphor, but effectively used here. Imagery of the yellow, good, and leaves suggests uh, autumn, a season associated with innings, maturity, and change. The crucial literary device here is irony, saying one thing but meaning another, or presenting a gap between appearance and reality. The speaker claims one path was less traveled by in the final stanza, but earlier stated they were really about the same and equally late that morning. This contradiction is the key to the poem. The tune is wistful and slightly self-mocking, especially with that ambiguous sigh in the final stanza. Is it satisfaction or regret? The poem doesn't tell us definitively. So, deeper meanings. So, what does this poem really mean? It isn't simply about non-conformity or choosing the unique path. Instead, it's about how we construct narratives about our choices. The speaker knows a well someday claim he took the road less traveled, given his choice meaning and significance it didn't have at the time. In reality, the paths were about the same, and his choice was somewhat arbitrary. Then took took the other as just as fair, but humans need to believe our choices matter, that we are protagonists in meaningful stories. So we retrospectively retrospectively create significance for arbitrary decisions, making ourselves the heroes of our own stories. Frost explores how we mythologize our own past decisions. The poem is simultaneously uh, sympathetic to this human need for meaning and gently ironic about it. Now let's go to the thematic elements. The central themes include the inevitability of choice. Life requires we choose paths without knowing outcomes. The impossibility of knowing outcomes, we cannot travel both roads to compare, and how we mythologize our own past decisions, we contrast flattering narratives about choices that may have been arbitrary. The sigh in the final stanza is deliberately ambiguous. Is to satisfaction, regrets, resignation, or a mixture. The poem suggests both satisfaction and regret can coexist. Frost examination how we create meaning through storytelling, even when that meaning doesn't match actual experience. The poem genuine or genius lies in its dramatic irony. The speaker tells us he'll misrepresent his story, yet reading often miss this irony and take the final line at uh, face value as an inspirational message. Frost is more subtle and complex than that simplistic reading allows. Common misreadings. Many readers see the poem or see this poem as celebrating the courage to be different, to choose unconventional paths. It's frequently used in graduation speeches with exactly this interpretation. But Frost shows the path were essentially identical, warned them really about the same, and the speaker's future claim of choosing the road less traveled as acknowledged as self-serving fiction. The speaker himself tells us he'll tell this story differently than it actually happened. The poem gently mocks how we aggrandize our choices, how we claim uniqueness and courage for decisions that were actually quite ordinary. This doesn't mean the poem is cynical. It's sympathetic to our need for meaning, but it's definitely ironic. Understanding this irony transforms the poem from the simple inspirational message to a sophisticated mediation on narrative choice and self-construction. Now let's go to personal interpretation. What emotional impact does the poem create? Many readers feel bittersweet recognition. We have all looked back at choices wondering what if, and we have all told ourselves stories about our decisions that may not be entirely accurate. Have you ever described a choice as more deliberate or meaningful than it actually was the time? That's what Forrest captures. The poem is both humorous and melancholic, accepting human nature's need for narrative self-justification while gently exposing it. It's neither clinical nor purely celebratory. It's complex in acknowledging both our need for meaning and the gap between narrative and reality. This case study demonstrates how initial expressions or impressions can evolve through careful analysis. The poem seemed simple, a walk in the woods, a choice between paths, but revealed layers of irony and complexity. Your analysis should follow similar paths, begin with gut reactions, systematically examine craft elements, note tensions and ambiguities, and build interpretations supported by textual evidence. Writing about poetry introduction, expressing your understanding, reading and analyzing poetry is only part of literary study. You must also communicate your interpretations effectively in writing. Writing about poetry requires special skills, supporting claims with textual evidence, integrating quotations smoothly, using appropriate literary terminology, and organizing ideas clearly. This section guides you through the process of crafting strong analytical essays that demonstrate your understanding while engaging readers with your insights. Good writing about poetry balances close attention to the text with your own critical thinking. You're not just summarizing what the poem says, you're making arguments about how it works and what it means. Now let's go to structuring analytical essays. Let's discuss essay structure. Your introduction should provide um, context, author, title, publication, date, if relevant, and a brief overview of the poem's project or subject. Your thesis should be an arguable claim about the poem meaning, technique, or effect, not just a plot summary. Do not write the poem It's about a person choosing a path. That's a summary. Instead, write something like through jeering, enjambment, and contradictory imagery. Sylvia's Plath daddy expresses the speaker's ambivalent relationship with her father, simultaneously seeking connections and separation. That's an arguable claim about how technique creates meaning. Body paragraphs should each focus on one main point, supporting your thesis. Begin with a topic sentence stating your point, then provide textual evidence through quotations, followed by analysis, examining how the evidence supports your claim. Always analyze, do not assume quotations speak for themselves. Connect each paragraph to your overview argument. Your conclusion should synthesize your argument without merely repeating it. Consider broader implications. How does your reading enhance understanding of the poem? What makes this poem significant? Connect to larger themes in the poet's work or broader literary contexts. Now let's go to using evidence from the text. Strong poetry analysis depends on textual evidence, quote specific words, phrases, or lines that support your claims, integrate quotations smoothly into your sentences using signal phrases. Frost indicates the speaker's declares the poem suggests after quoting. Always analyze, explain how the quoted language creates meaning or supports your interpretations. Do not just drop in a quote and move on. When quoting, poetry preserve line breaks with a slash and space. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both for quotations larger than 3 lines. Use block formats intended or indented without quotation marks, maintaining line breaks. Always cite line numbers, not page numbers, because poems can be printed in different books with different pagination, but line members remain constant. Incorporation MLA style citations. Use MLA format for citing poetry for text citations. Include the line numbers in parentheses after quotations, line 1 to 2 for first citation, then just numbers 3 to 4 for subsequent citations. When citing the entire poem rather than specific lines, include the poet's last name first. Your works cited entry should include boy's last name, first name, poem's title, book title, or website title, publisher, publication year. For example, first Rupert, the road not taken, mountain, interval, Henry Holt, 1916, following proper citation format, demonstrates academic professionalism and allows readers to locate your source. Tips for clear, insightful writing. Here are some tips. First, be specific and precise. Use exact terminology when discussing poetic devices. Do not just say the language is interesting or effective. Explain how specific metaphors create meaning or why particular rhythms enhance mood. Precision demonstrates understanding. Second, avoid plot summary analysis or analysis. Essays aren't POC reports. Don't just retell what happens. Assume your reader has read the poem. Instead, make arguments about meanings, techniques, and effects. Use the poem as evidence. Third, write um, present tense. Use literary present tense when discussing poems. Frost suggests not first. suggested that this convention treats literary works as existing in an eternal present, always available for reading, force organized logically with each paragraph, building toward your overall argument. Use transitions between paragraphs. Fifth, develop your own ideas. Do not just repeat what class discussion covered. Strong essays demonstrate original thinking supported by textual evidence. The importance of revision. Revision is absolutely essential. First drafts focus on getting ideas down. Revision refines those ideas, strengthen evidence, improves organization, and polishes languages. Um, Always proofread for grammar and citation errors. Small errors undermine your credibility. Reading your essay aloud helps catch awkward phrasing and unclear arguments. You will hear problems you do not see. Consider having a peer review your draft before submitting. Fresh eyes catch things you miss. Remember, good writing is writing. Professional writers revise extensively. You should too. Then let's go to creating your own poetry introduction. Now let's shifted from analyzing other the poetry to creating your own. Studying poetry isn't complete without trying to write it yourself. Creating poetry deepens your appreciation for the craft by putting you in the poet's position, making conscious choices about every word and line. You experience firsthand the challenges and the pleasures of composition. You do not need to be a born poet to write meaningful poem. There is no such things as a born poet, just people who practice writing. You just need willingness to experiment, revise, and apply what you've learned about poetic techniques. This section guides you from first experiments to polished pieces, helping you find your poetic voice. Now let's move to using learned devices in your writing, and we will stop here and continue next time, inshallah. All the literary devices and literate and structural elements you've studied become tools for your own creation. When drafting poems, consciously apply specific techniques. Want to create musicality, use alliteration, accents, or rhyme, need vivid description, layer sensory imagery, appealing to multiple senses, exploring complex emotions that try metaphor or symbolism, starting with deliberate use of specific devices might feel artificial at first. You might think, I'm trying too hard. This feels forced. This normal. It builds skills through conscious practice. With practice, technique becomes intuitive and your natural voice emerges. It's like learning to drive a car. At first, you concisely think about every moment, but eventually it becomes automatic and you develop your own driving style. So we will stop here and we continue, inshallah, the final and the third session tomorrow. So until next time, tata for now.